You know, fire is the worst thing that can threaten a ship, in a wood ship, sailing ship at the time. And the Navy's actually used fire as a weapon. And we're not talking hot shot, we're talking deliberately lighting ships on fire and sailing them directly at the opponent. So stay tuned, we're going to talk about fire ships. Welcome to today's edition of Hedgehog Naval Academy. Now today we're going to cover a single topic, and that is that of fire ships. This is actually something I did not want to cover during the fleet building video itself, because this is a very special type of ship that you can include in your fleet. You don't have to have special scenarios for this. Anytime you're building a fleet for a scenario, you can include fire ships into it. They're considered unrated ships, and you can have a maximum of 4 of them per 1,000 points in your list. Now, fire ships are a very unusual beast. Historically, and in the game, looking at the stat line, they're essentially merchant ships that were purchased really for the sole purpose of being used in this manner, whether they were derelicts that were headed for scrap anyway, or whether they were pressed into service out of some sense of urgency and emergency. But what makes a fire ship special is that they were deliberately lit ablaze and set on sail. Crew would leave, and the ship would just continue on its merry way toward the opponent's fleet. Okay, usually they would be engaging fleets such as around harbors and such, whether they're blockading ships or whether they're actual ships in port. That's why I would suggest you explore the use of fire ships in some of the scenarios where the opponent is either blockading you, or conversely, you are trying to interact with them. They're near a port or near land, and you know what direction they're likely to come through. So fire ships can be very useful. So let's kind of take a look at the ship and the stat line and how you might consider using them. Alright, so here I've got just a couple merchant ships. They are the small merchant ships, and they're specifically chosen because they are medium. So let's take a quick look at the fire ship stat line in the rule book itself. So here's an example, here's the actual fire ship stat line. You'll notice it's a medium ship that has absolutely no cannon. It only has 20 ship points. So you'll notice, just for reference, small merchant has 28. Now, remember, these merchant ships aren't necessarily in the best of shape, so that's why they would be represented with, having fewer hull points. They might even be lighter cargo ships or merchant ships. They still can only turn using the yellow turn arc. Rate of knots is 3, and there's a break value of 7. Now, I'm not entirely certain why that is, the way the rules are written, but a fire ship historically was crewed up until the point they lit it afire and basically locked in its steering, and then they would abandon ship and leave the fire ship to do its thing. Hopefully, something damaging the enemy ship, but the crew would leave, so there really would be no point in striking colors. So I don't know what they're thinking here, but we'll just ignore that, and that's the way it works. So these can strike their colors if they basically take more than 13 points of damage. Now, fire ships have, you can represent them like I did with these any merchant ship. So you might want to get a couple extras. You even use some extra frigates if you have too many frigates laying around. Not that I guess you can have too many frigates, but any medium-sized ship model will work, and you don't have to be very fancy with it. But you should take some of the fire wool, and you could even permanently glue it to it if you want to actually make dedicated fire ships. Since it doesn't have any guns, you can model it even without the guns. There's just a lot of things you can do from a modeling perspective. But the thing is, these things are designed to be lit, and they often had extra material to kind of keep the fires going. They didn't carry any powder, so there was no chance of really exploding. So that's, again, you're not going to be rolling, doing any explosion checks on a fire ship. So let's take a look at how you use them. Essentially, they operate just like any other ship. They are activated in weather gauge order, and each activation they will move directly forward at battle sails. The only time that changes is if they're affected by wind or a collision. So if you're collided and you're kind of grappled together, you're stuck at anchored at that point. If the opponent gets away from you, then you can go ahead and start moving forward. Probably light sail first, and then eventually battle sail. You can try to get up to battle sail. If ever your ship it's involved in a collision, it will always fail its collision test. Remember, the whole purpose of a fire ship is to get close to the opponent's ships to light them on fire. And as a result, you're going to want to fail that test. The way fire ships work in the game is whenever a fire ship gets within 2 inches of any other ship, friend or foe, that other ship is automatically considered on fire. So it immediately will take a certain dice value of damage and be set ablaze, having to worry about that and the potential for explosion in its activation. Now, what's interesting is if you roll on the weather table and you end up rolling either a 2, 3, 11, or 12, basically any change of weather or wind direction or speed, all fire ships will automatically be considered having a rudder hit. So you place a rudder hit or steering hit on the ship, and that remains with it for the rest of the game. Okay? So essentially, from that point forward, it's really going to be moving in a random direction with each of its turns or its activations. It may turn left, may turn right. You don't have any control over it again. So that could be very dangerous. Of course, if it ends up moving into the wind, there could be issues with taking damage for not being able to tack or failure tack rolls and all that. You could actually end up in a position where you're going light sails or anchored again because of going into the wind. So now you might consider using fire ships when you're running scenarios basically 7, 8, and 9. Coastal Raid, Run the Blockade, or Landing Expedition. The reason I bring that up is that in these scenarios you're able to build your own fleet within a point limit. And as the attacker, you're moving toward a known location where the opponent's ships are going to be. Now, unfortunately, in Landing Expedition, you're also trying to get there with one of your ships, or 3 of your ships, so it's a little riskier there, but sending your fire ships ahead may very well be a way to kind of clear and disrupt the opponent so that you can actually get your ships to drop off the troops on Landing Expedition. But in any of the cases, you'll be able to move the ships forward toward the opponent, hopefully getting within 2 inches of enemy ships to set them ablaze and cause havoc on their lines, or if nothing else, push them away, get them kind of isolate themselves from each other so you can kind of pick them off a little more easily. So that's really what fire ships are useful for. That's what they were used historically, and that's how you can use them in these games. Now, being only 20 hull points, they can be dealt with pretty easily, but again, that means the opponent is firing at your fire ship and not your regular ships. And since fire ships have a cost of 80 points, which is actually a lot more than a merchant ship, it's the cost of a brig. Arguably, it can do more damage than a brig because it's disrupting the opponent a whole lot more. But it's just another option that you can use when you're going into these scenarios. Alright, so that's really in a nutshell what Fireships are all about. I'm going to go ahead. I said the opposite before, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually include a couple Fireships in my list for the next and last naval exercise. So, surprise my opponent with those. You'll be able to see then what happens and how reliable or unreliable they are. Because remember, the one thing to remember with Fireships is though they might be able to do a lot of damage, as soon as the wind changes from that point on, they become extremely unpredictable and dangerous to both sides. So, with that in mind, we'll go ahead and sign off. See you guys in the next video, which will actually be, for this series, the final naval exercise where we're going to try to take the tower, or capture the fort. Alright, bye-bye.